So hello and welcome to In Conversation With. My name is Colin MacDonald, and as always I'm joined by my lovely co-host Mr. Gavin Kelly.
How are you doing, folks? Good evening.
Before we start, we'd just like to offer our thanks to Katie, to Ruth and to Focus Ireland for inviting us to host this panel. We're very privileged to do that. Homelessness is obviously a massive problem in our country at the moment. I think Gavin is going to give us a little bit more context on that.
Definitely. Homelessness is an issue that has definitely worsened in the past 5 years. Estimates show that since 2014 there's been about a 7,000 person increase in homelessness, and that doesn't even account for people in refuge, those sleeping rough, or those in hidden homelessness. So it's really a big issue that I think as young people we really need to take action, and that's why we're partnering with Focus Ireland to talk about that today.
Yeah, so joining us on the panel today is Paul Kelly, Manager of Youth Services at Focus Ireland, Craig McHugh, Vice President of the Dublin Region of the USI, and Cathal Curry, Project Manager of Giveback.ie. So,
Yeah, Cathal, we'll start with you. As a Project Manager of a social enterprise, we just want to know, what are the most effective methods or ways of educating people about the issue of homelessness in Ireland?
Yeah, so I suppose it's I think certainly, like, we're obviously in DCU here and it's a student environment. I think the idea of educating people around homelessness, we've kind of even moved past that. I don't think there's any student in DCU that isn't aware of a housing crisis is going on. You could just look across the road at like what happened with like Shannon, where they increased their rent by, Craig will correct me, what was it? 24%. So
yeah, I felt that personally.
Yeah, so I don't think it's education. I think it goes beyond that. It's about like, I suppose, getting people angry enough to kind of take action in some way, and that's what we were trying to do with Giveback.ie, getting people to download it for their phones or on Chrome. And yeah, I think it's just about finding that next step. Everyone's aware of it. I think it was around like marriage equality and repeal and stuff. Everyone knew it was out there, but it took a proper movement to like mobilize everyone, particularly the young people. So I think that's kind of where we need to go in Ireland right now.
In the build-up to this, we discussed you taking trips to Finland, and I mean, for some of the statistics, they've reduced their numbers in the past 30 years from 18,000 to about 7,000, approximately. What did you see over there that they're doing right that perhaps we're not doing and should be doing over here?
Yeah, so I suppose Finland's an interesting country for us to look at because, like, I suppose we're quite similar in terms of population and quite similar in the way that they have a lot of like migration from their rural areas into like one big city being Helsinki. So obviously that has parallels with Ireland here. One big factor was they basically set up this state body that was called the Y Foundation, and they're a pretty impressive bunch of people. They essentially took it's obviously more complicated than this, but in summary they had like a 3-step approach. They looked at building houses, so kind of traditional social houses. They looked at building or building like, rather than temporary accommodation like a hostel here. So if someone's on the street here tonight in Dublin, they'll go into a hostel and they'll kind of be kicked out at 7 o'clock in the morning, in a lot of cases. And they kind of got rid of all of that in Finland, and it was just that people were given a bed essentially and given keys, and then the wraparound supports were put in place after that to try and take action. So I think when Finland implemented this policy, they had about the same number of homeless as we do in Dublin currently. It's not that radical an idea. I was talking to young people over there, people like 21, 22, and they were like, yeah, it was our most conservative government that introduced this policy. And I was kind of like, wow, like that's incredible. And they were, at the time, it wasn't seen as radical, it was just seen as something that should be done. And I think there's a lot that can be learned from what they did over there and bring it back to Ireland and
fantastic.
Make a difference.
Craig, like I mentioned, over the past 2 years you've had roles with the DCU and more recently now the USI. Through those roles you've had a lot of contact with some of our country's leaders, not all of it friendly. But what do you think needs to be done at a state level in terms of legislation to combat this crisis?
I think we need to recognise it as an actual crisis. I don't think the government recognises it as a crisis. I think they've kind of accepted that we're going to have homelessness, and that homelessness is a symptom of society and it's a symptom of an economy. I think if we look at some of the so-called biggest economies in the world, they have homelessness and they accept it, and that's very worrying because that's the kind of trend that I picked up, particularly off the people that are in government at the moment. But there is kind of optimism. So even like I've even noticed in certain political parties, the recognition of the impact and influence of vulture funds and stuff like that. Some political parties are starting to come around to that, but it's very, very slow, and it's way too slow. And I suppose what really needs to happen is the political parties also need to, particularly the ones in opposition, need to move away from this kind of virtual signalling politics that I've picked up on, where, let's say, we propose a campaign or we like co-sponsor the promotion of a bill, like, for example, the Raise the Roof bill that was passed a year ago, which was looking at the right to housing, looking at a constitutional right to housing, looking at building mass-scale public housing. And that was sponsored by Fianna Fáil, Labour, all the major political parties, Sinn Féin, except for Fine Gael, I suppose, passed in the Dáil. Nothing's actually been done. So I think it's about making sure that those political parties, those ones that want to get into government, they don't just kind of pass it in their policy or as a publicity stunt, that now in the context and in the build-up to a general election, we're looking at a situation where they're putting it in their programmes for government, where they're going to commit to these things, as opposed to just talking about things when they're in opposition, saying the housing crisis is so bad, homelessness is such an issue, about actually committing to things and changing their ideological outlook on things. Because I think we have a big, big obsession in this country with land and value, and like if you look at Finland, that's the way we should be taking things. Ireland has this. It's like something that's left over from the famine, where we're obsessed with land and owning land and making money off land. Land, housing should be looked at as a basic human need and human right. But in Ireland, we don't really look at that. We commodify it. We charge high rents. We don't see the immoral side to it. We just think that's a cog, that's a symptom of a good economy, that's a symptom of an economy growing. But then you look at Finland, and a conservative government recognises land is a social, public good kind of thing. So it really just goes to show that as a country, we really need to start changing how we view property and housing, and start looking at it as something that should be a human right, whether that's constitutional change, like Cathal alluded to, repeal and marriage equality. They're great ways to mobilise people. So if people want to start a movement on that, maybe that's something that needs to be looked at. It's been looked at already, and people are talking about it. But really, we need a kind of shift in behaviour. We need a shift in people's actually opinion about land and housing in this country.
And you mentioned there is a lot of discourse about change, but nothing really has been done yet. Are you hopeful now, in the past, let's say, year and a half that you've been involved with the SU, have you seen any developments that give you hope that something will be done sooner rather than later?
I suppose, look, some political parties, like since Shannon, obviously that's been legislated for. We have rent pressure zones at 4% because of what happened in Shannon and Kirch, and through lobbying you get these things done. But I mean, does that really go far enough? Why is Shannon across the road still $9,000? Do you know what I mean? What student can afford that? Why are we building, I think it's eight or 10 luxury student accommodation blocks? I think it was 8 or 10 student accommodation blocks in Dublin, 8 alone. And these aren't they're not there for housing students, they're there pretty much as hotels. And actually, if you go into Dublin City Council or on Bloor Penala and check the applications for planning, you'll actually see some of them are applying to change their use. So they'll apply to change their use as maybe as a tourist place or something like that. These places are filling the targets of the government student accommodation strategy, but they're just hotels. That's all they are. I'm a little bit pessimistic, to be quite honest. I'd love to come back and say, yeah, I've seen great progress in the last 18 months. No, this country has become absolutely almost more ideologically opposed for the people that are in power at the moment, from what I've seen. And it's kind of little things, the government very much so know that students in digs accommodation have no rights whatsoever. They know this, and they don't act on it because they favour landlords over tenants. I know I contacted with a student who was sitting on a bus and told me this bizarre story of a lad who asked him could he move to the other side of the bus so he could sit down and put his flat screen TV on the seat beside him, because he was moving his stuff out of his room every weekend because his landlord was using the place as an Airbnb at the weekend. That's absolutely bizarre. But yet, and the government knows, no, it's not changing reality. So a little bit pessimistic.
Okay.
So, Craig, as someone who works for the needs of students in the SU and now the USI, what do you think for emerging students who are kind of the focus of this discussion? How can we get them to be more involved and actually take action about something they're already so aware of?
I think the best way to do it is vote. I'd never tell anyone to vote for any particular political party. But I think start making this an issue. If a politician asks you for your vote, ask them about housing. And everyone gets caught up that housing is consumed by the term homelessness. Your rights have been diminished drastically in the last number of years when it comes to housing. Ask them about that, because if you want to own a home someday in this country, things are going to have to change, because right now housing is inaccessible. Beyond that, I think students and young people need to become active, raise the roof, homeless and housing coalition groups, get involved with grassroots groups, get involved with social enterprise like Giveback, get involved, come to these sleepouts, get involved with community groups. They're the best ways to do things on the ground. Raise awareness about it. It's bizarre. I don't know if people saw the 5-year-old that was eating a carbonara off a cardboard box 2 nights ago on the curb of a Dublin street. This is one of the richest countries in the world. Young people are absolutely opposed and feel ill looking at those images. You need to vote, but you also need to put it into the psyche of the older generations, because perhaps they're not directly affected by it, and they need to understand that this is an issue. So realistically, young people need to make sure that they work with students' unions, work with groups on the ground, work with Focus Ireland, work with different NGOs, charities, to make this the number one issue in an election, because unfortunately that's the only way politicians listen.
And is that a problem, an apathy from people who might not be directly affected by these sort of issues? Is that a massive problem in trying to mobilise the larger masses?
Look, apathy is there not because people don't care. Apathy is there because the ideological approach to things is, if you chip away at something and make it seem so bad and make it last so bad, people immediately, after some time, think it'll never get fixed. So apathy only ever comes when things aren't fixed and things go on. For example, a health crisis, and apathy is very, very dangerous for democracy. We've seen apathy and its results in Brexit and Trump. We know that in America, when things don't actually change and people's lives don't get better over a long period of time, they don't start voting for progressive people or people that will help their lives. They vote for the far right. Very, very worrying that this country could go down a very similar slippy path unless we actually take care and look after society. So, yeah, I think, look, the way of addressing apathy really is like, really getting, if you are affected by this, start having more conversations about it. Start talking about it the same way we talked about the fact that our LGBT friends and brothers and sisters were, treated poorly by the law, or that, women in this country were treated like second-class citizens. Let's start looking at this as people being treated as second-class citizens, and that law needs to change. And this idea that it's going to cost us a fortune is absolutely ridiculous. Like this whole idea of putting money messages on stuff. No, that's not it. This is investment, and this is about society, because unless we actually fix society, we're going to go down a very dangerous slippery slope.
Sorry, can just come in there on that
Yeah.
one? And it's a point that both you raise. For someone who's working in homeless services, but as a member of society, the one thing I don't think we've actually had is, what type of society do we want? There's been no dialectic in terms of, this is what I want to see happening for the next generation. It's all about, who can I get to vote for me? And homelessness is symptomatic, and it's a big symptom of a society that does not know what it wants. What are our values?
Yeah.
And I actually don't think we've had that conversation. I often think of 1916 and things like that, the Dublin lockout, and go, why isn't that happening today?
Yeah.
There's no, and I think successive governments have got people into a very individualistic, get up, get out, do your job, go home, and close the door.
Yeah.
That's it. And if you have any society like that, you are not going to effect change. You mentioned apathy, and I often think the opposite of apathy is hope. But you talk to people, that they are hopeless.
Yeah.
Was it yesterday there was a picture of a 106-year-old lady in Meath, and to hear that, you're kind of going, whoa. But there is, I'm sure government are going, no, we don't want that image. And I do fundamentally believe we have not had a proper conversation on what do we want? What is Ireland? What is Ireland Inc.? If we were to brand it, what is that?
I think even touching on that as well is that when you look at maybe like Michael D. Higgins' re-election, or you look at marriage equality, or you look at divorce referendum, or repeal the eighth and all this kind of stuff. So the media immediately respond to this as Ireland is a tolerant and open society, and we all get really happy and proud about ourselves. And like, they're great moments, they really are. But we're not actually recognising what do we want. We're not really tolerant. No. We really are. We need to wake up and realise that. You know, racism started to show its ugly face in the last 18, 24 months. And it's because we really actually don't know what we want or who we are, because the real symptom and the real effect of the last economic crash was that we all got so scared, and all of a sudden, once we could all benefit ourselves, individualistically, as you said, then we're okay. And we're not actually open enough about that. We're not actually open enough about caring. Look, we're one of the biggest donators per capita when it comes to charity. But, you know, and charity is so important. But the fact that there's a need for such is bizarre. The fact that we have 10,500 homeless people in this country, when we have a population of less than 5 million, and a lot of them are in one of the richest countries richest cities per capita in the world, that is absolutely astounding. So like you said, we need to really ask ourselves, look inwardly and ask ourselves, who are we? And if we are a selfish bunch, label it that. Do you know what I mean? Because, and work on that.
And also, I mean, as much as you want to help homelessness, it could go the other way. Ireland is now, I think, it's the second or third most expensive city to live in the world, ahead of so many. Like, I'm pretty sure Tokyo was in that list, Sydney and all that. Is there a danger of it going the other way as well?
As in, what?
Homelessness getting worse instead of...
Oh, homelessness is
undoubtedly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. This city in particular, go very similar to cities in the west coast of America, where you literally have tents as a normal symptom of the city. And like, people think
we already do have tents.
We do, yeah, we do already. Like, you saw that image of the Deliveroo driver who was camping in his tent like 20 metres away from the office of An Taoiseach. And that's the reality. People are working in their jobs, but they can't afford the rent. And also, when they are staying somewhere, the people could just decide to hike up the rent by doing some refurbishments. There's no rights in this country when it comes to being a tenant.
And to speak to what Finland have done is, they've made a very deliberate decision around how they want to approach homelessness. Like, we're putting 166 million euros next year in the budget into solving homelessness, but you can't solve it in creating more emergency accommodation. That creates almost an out of sight, out of mind. Finland flipped that model on its head by giving people housing first, and then you can wrap services around. Because the other thing is, not everybody needs multiple services to actually exit homelessness. A small amount of money can get someone out of homelessness. Their internal resources have been depleted. We often hear, particularly in mental health, about resilience. So if you imagine that capital within us to exit homelessness, if anybody here thought about entering the homeless system, it would strip your humanity away quite quickly. And in what you have to do to actually be declared homeless, and then once you're declared homeless, what you have to do to navigate that system. And in services that I work in, which are youth services, them individuals have been depleted already as is. But the Y Foundation, they've made a deliberate choice as a nation. Let us house people. Manchester is bigger than Ireland, if memory serves me correctly, in terms of population. And yet, we have, how many TDs?
158.
And I think Manchester has 1 MP. There's an absolute dissonance there in what we do. There's a rhetoric and a narrative by government. We're doing this.
I think it's fair to say we do have a rural-urban divide in this country between Dublin and then the counties ahead. But homelessness is an issue that's prevalent all across Ireland. So does the strategy in rural areas for homelessness need to be different than the cities?
The acknowledgement of it does.
Is the discourse too Dublin-centric at the moment?
Possibly it is, but I think when you look at homelessness, the concept of homelessness, what do we mean by homelessness? It's not just someone out on a street in a sleeping bag. People who are couch surfing in rural areas, asking the question. Like there's people sleeping in cow sheds, and people know about this, but they're not homeless. They'll always excuse it by something else. Being from the country myself, you hear, "Oh, sure, that fella, don't worry about him. He's a queer one." But that queer one is actually homeless. If he was
This is where the hidden homeless.
This is the hidden homelessness.
Yeah.
But we don't like to acknowledge that he is homeless, because then I have to ask myself awkward questions. What is home to me? And there's another discussion that needs to be had, because everybody says, "Oh, surely if you do this, that'll solve homelessness." But what's home to you? Like, what is home to everybody in this room? Homelessness to some young people I work with is probably safer. And that's a double irony. It's paradoxical. But I think that, yes, the conversation is Dublin-centric and is becoming Galway-centric, Cork-centric. It's an urban issue, and reflective of that level of urban decay, that of society breaking down, of individualism. Like everybody asks, how did Trump get elected? He was elected, regardless of what way we want to approach this. People voted him in an imperfect system. We forgot to ask why.
Just even let's say it is an urban-rural divide, okay? And obviously there's a major issue of homelessness when it comes to rural areas. But there's so much money in this city. Like this city is, people don't understand how much wealth is actually in this city. Like people think of Little Ireland, Little Dublin. Dublin is the centre of Europe at the moment. There is so much wealth in this country. We don't talk enough about
It's the tech centre of Europe, sorry.
It is, yeah. It was Silicon. They've renamed the Docklands on Google Maps to Silicon Docks. It's now called Silicon Docks. So this country has changed enormously. Economic growth, brilliant. We've all been lifted supposedly by some big wave. But we're not looking at actually saying, what's our share of this? What do we get out of this? Yeah, a few jobs going around, but what happens when the economy tanks? What have we actually gotten from the last 10, 12, 15 years of so-called economic growth? Nothing. In fact, we've depleted as a society. We've become more individualistic, more selfish. We've more homeless people.
More billionaires.
More billionaires than ever before. And you get into a political, ideological conversation like that for another day. But realistically, we don't actually recognise in this country how much money is here, particularly in this city. You could sort out the homeless crisis like that. You could embark on a public housing programme not seen since the 60s and double it with the amount of wealth that's in this city. But we don't have the political will to do so. So yeah, maybe there's a rural-urban divide, but there's money to fix it, and we need to actually start having a conversation about wanting to fix it, and maybe shake a few boots. And people say if we do that, they'll pack up and leave. That's not true, especially after Brexit. This city is really going to get a proper, very much so, a proper dividend. And I know an economist like myself and Cathal are big fans of David McGuinness, has said really, if we don't actually address the land issue in this country and the homelessness issue in this country, right across the board, we're not going to get that Brexit dividend. And we're going to be looked as too expensive to set up. So for all the big capitalists in the room or listening to the conversation, this affects you too. So whether you're selfish and individualistic when it comes to this, you're going to be affected by this very soon. And I hate to flip that on the side and be like, you've no empathy, whatever, you don't care about this issue. This affects literally everyone, and anyone can become homeless. Anyone. You're in most cases you need 2 or 3 paychecks away from it.
I would argue one paycheck.
Well, most people are one, but some people can be 2 or 3.
And you mentioned capitalism. I suppose people think that capitalistic principles are anti-homeless. I think you can still solve homelessness within a capitalist system. It goes back to what do we want as a society. Most people at heart don't like homelessness. I have rarely heard anybody talking about it is their fault. You know, the moral argument. I think as a nation, we've grown out of that moral argument a little bit. It's still there, absolutely, you know, but it's far and few between. And once you move out of moralism and you start to look more at, okay, we've got an issue here, people are starting to grapple it. But I do think we need to talk more about community. And it sounds namby-pamby, but it's not actually namby-pamby. You know, when I see young kids, I often say to my staff, we are raising parents. You know, and that is what it is. And it's a worldview that we try to espouse, and I think we haven't got a great worldview in Ireland at the moment. It looks great on a billboard. There'll be a musical, Jerry Springer musical, Mark II, probably coming out.
But actually, Ireland, and again, I hate to be so Dublin-centric with this because it's a national thing, but I don't know if anyone saw the picture.
Are you from Dublin?
No, I'm actually from Louth. So, we won't say which part. But, like, if you actually look at there's a poster that came out, it's up on, I think it's, I can't remember what street it was, it wasn't Kildare Street, but anyway, there's a poster basically of this couple and they're on holiday to Dublin and they take a picture and all you can see in the background is hotel, 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 hotel. Oh, we built. Cathal, you tweeted this, I can't remember what the exact text was.
That tweet went pretty viral.
It went
pretty
viral,
proud.
yeah. Maybe I'll let you talk about it then. You know, we're building too many hotels.
I know, it was. I think that's in the conversation now, and no one's saying that we can't be building hotels, and no one's saying we can't attract tourists here. But there's got to be a happy balance there, and that one particular tweet was just talking about all the venues and nightclubs and different stuff that was closing up around Dublin, and under it I had listed off a pile of them that had closed, and then I said, all that's opened is hotels and student accommodation, when really I should have just said hotels, because that's all the student accommodation is becoming anyway.
And when you're in those student accommodation places, remember, you're treated like you're in a hotel. It's a licensee. If you go on to Live Student Accommodation, I'll call them out now because they need to sort it out. And if you go onto their website, or you go onto any purpose-built student accommodation website, built in the last 2 years, some of them will say your tenancy. What it means to be a tenant in this place. You're not a tenant. You don't have any tenant's rights. You are basically a hotel visitor. That's the same level of rights you have.
You do have a pool table though.
Well, you do have a pool table. Oh, you have a bowling alley too, and and you might have a cinema.
As if all students want is a pool table and a cinema. As if we can't go down to the pub and we don't have Netflix. It's what in reality is everyone just wants some a bed, someplace they can make their breakfast in the morning, and a safe environment.
Slow-mo shots of them playing pool or watching a film together, when the basic need is a bed to sleep in at night.
An affordable bed.
Glossed over. Affordable bed.
I think the piece that's missed around the student accommodation is who is attracted into that? It's those students outside the EU, and there's another conversation that has been lost, that the third level sector is being asked to finance itself in a very different manner, and it's clearly it's for people who can afford to come to be educated, and I'm sure universities are in a dilemma. They're going, right, we need to educate people. Now, how are we going to do this?
This is Craig's favourite topic now. You've just brought him onto it.
The funding for higher education in this country is abysmal. We've cut it drastically and we haven't restored that funding, but the symptoms of it are so clear. For example, a student got onto us the other day angry about the fact that they're fixing the lifts during the middle of the week, and made the very good point that that they're probably fixing them in the middle of the week so they can work for the tourists that are visiting the Book of Kells at the weekend, because certain institutions need to, and most institutions need to, find other ways to fill their funding gap. And one of the main ways they're filling their funding gap is with international students. International students are brilliant for this city, they're brilliant for this country. It's great to have them, add vibrancy, diversity to the place. But they pay about 10, 11 grand a year. They fill this funding gap that the government absolutely ignores, does not want to touch. If you're paying 10, 11 grand, the luxury student accommodation places sees two things. They see a market with people that says, I'm willing to pay a lot of money to come to college in Dublin. I have a bit of money. I'll pay for this luxury student accommodation. Looks pretty nice, looks pretty sweet. They've got some social stuff too, so I'm going to fit in grand, all good. So they build all these places. They get tax incentives, tax breaks for doing them as well. They get to skip out on mass building regulations because Owen Murphy has relaxed them so they can build these things up, so they can meet the projections for the National Student Accommodation Strategy. And all of a sudden you have this vicious cycle while the government is saying we're meeting our targets on student accommodation building, meanwhile breaking up communities, because communities don't want these glorified hotels in their back gardens, 7-8 stories high in some cases. And then all of a sudden you're still left with a system that's drastically underfunded. 16 people in a tutorial room built for 8 or 9. Some cases, some lecturers on precarious work contracts that leads them to being part of the hidden homelessness. Some lecturers sleeping in their cars. This country since the recession has had an economic boom, but society hasn't had a share of it. And we're now really starting to see the really, really ugly symptoms of it. And like we said earlier, unless we address this, things could go in a very nasty direction.
And you have the connection between reaching your student accommodation numbers is you hear the narrative that will free up the private rented market, that people who are homeless or requiring accommodation can access. But actually, when you look at it in a tiered economy the way we have it, it's the person who can pay the most money.
Yeah.
Like we would have young people who we will support them. They'll never say that they're homeless, things like that. We provide them with suits, things like that. They go along, and this could be their 200th viewing, and they walk in, and they say to us, you could smell the money. It was dripping out of them. And people will command a rent. So they'll say, there's the official rent, and there's the rent and that's because student accommodation has been not delivering what there's no connection between what we're saying.
If you want to fix the housing market, build public housing.
Absolutely.
Just do it.
And that's
stop
known.
messing around. Like, that's the only way you're going to fix it. Do it fast. Spend the money, do it. Get loans, borrow, invest, build. This population is going to boom and continue to grow. We need to house our people, and things are literally just going to get worse unless we actually build public housing. And public housing isn't just council estates. Public housing is also, when it comes to students, it means purpose-built student accommodation on campuses around the country and nearby campuses that is affordable and accessible for young people. We can't have a situation where young people are literally saying, I'm going to have to take 3-4 years out and save up to go to college because I can't pay the fees, which are now the highest in the EU 27, can't pay the rents, which are in some cases the highest in many parts of Europe, just after Paris and London. We are denying a generation. You mentioned the lockout. I think we're living through another lockout. I think we, as Generation Z in particular, and millennials, are the locked out generation. The generation denied an actual opportunity to be able to access the basic fundamentals of what society normally offers, maybe a steady life, somewhere to call home, which then breeds out, how am I going to have a relationship? How am I going to get married? How am I going to settle down and have kids? How could you feel comfortable enough to raise a family in this city when you don't know whether or not you're going to be able to pay your rent in 2 months' time?
I think if I let Craig go any further, they're all going to end up outside Leinster House. And probably
Inspired us all anyway.
So before we bring Laura in, Paul, I just want you to give us a little bit of a background on the Shine Light and how you're now incorporating it with this Future Leaders initiative.
So Focus Ireland started Shine a Light 8 years ago, and it targeted business leaders to actually go and sleep out for a night and to give money. There was a fee attached for sleeping out. And that's acknowledging that business leaders are influencers. And the next step on from that was work teams started to do this. And we're now at a stage in the country where there's traction for future leaders, and that is E. Because I'm working at this 20 years, which is a generation. I think 25 years is a generation, but it takes each generation to add something to the narrative to enhance what we're doing, when you move into the world of work, to actually influence companies because you can still be a capitalist and have a social justice streak in you. And I think that's the piece that's often missed. So that's why we're partnering up with third level institutions in Ireland. This is our first year for doing it, and I believe we were hoping to get 4 or 5 colleges to do it, and if memory serves me, it's 12. 11 have actually joined up. So that actually shows you the momentum that is in a third level sector, probably because it's been a felt issue. People are feeling it, they're living it, they know how precarious it is, and that is the difficulty that we're facing. Services I work within, we have young people who are studying in third level institutions in Dublin. So they are deemed homeless by the state, but they're actually in third level and they can do it.
We're joined now on the panel by Laura Horan. Laura is a former DCU student and she's now the Community Fundraising Executive for Focus Ireland. Laura, you experienced homelessness in your time here in DCU. Do you want to just share a little bit of your experience?
It actually wasn't during my time here. I think is this on?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it actually wasn't during my time in here. It was actually, I was aged 8 till I was 12. But when I came to DCU, I kind of got the opportunity to talk a bit about the struggles that I'd been through. I don't know if any of you know about DCU MPS, the Media Production Society. So I would have been the events in the MPS, and one of the years we obviously had the broadcast coming up, which I'm sure you all know about, and we were sitting around a table of 12 and we said, right, what charity are we going to do it for? And I just kind of said it to everyone. I said, look, I was homeless when I was a child, and it was really upsetting for me, and I just kind of lay it out on the table, and oh my God, everyone got out of the room and went out crying. And I don't think I'd told myself how upsetting that was, or I'd really tackled any of that kind of aftercare, what kind of Paul talks about that people need after exiting homelessness. And that really helped me, get that off my chest and then help other people. I had a lot of people on Facebook, on Instagram and everything reaching out to me being like, I went through the same thing, I'm so glad you talked about it and now you're in college and so on. So yeah, that's kind of how I came today.
So in terms of your work now with Focus Ireland, how did your experience back then influence what you're doing now? And could you just give us a rundown of basically what you've done with Focus Ireland so far and what you hope to achieve in the future?
Yeah, so I love working for Focus Ireland. I think when I did the broadcast then and doing our big fundraiser for charity, so we raised €15,000 in 24 hours. I know, and I would love to see the Shine Light future leaders sleep out, being able to achieve that in the future, which is amazing, to get to that extreme. So from that, doing the fundraising from there, I kind of did a lot of events in DCU. I've been working with charities for 2 years now, and I've just kind of really enjoyed looking at what I can give back. I've taken advantage of a lot of services in Ireland. I'm an Access student. I got the Susie grant. Obviously I'm in a corporation house after being homeless. I got counselling services. There's been a lot of services out there. There's been a lot of charities out there that have given to me. I really see in my life now that, if I can't do justice to them charities back, I don't feel right kind of gaining their services and not being able to give back in any way I can. And events is something I'm really passionate about in any way, so fundraising and events really overlap. So we in Focus Ireland have loads of events coming up. Obviously Shining Light Future Leaders is Shining Light in general is huge, but we've been working really hard on Future Leaders. Then we have a lovely Zico night coming up that I hope you all can attend, which is all in aid of Focus Ireland again, which is another event, and we have done a charity brunch recently and stuff like that. So it is just constantly looking, what you all said earlier, is getting the community together, educating them on what's happening, while also giving back.
Fantastic, yeah. We're nearly at the end, but do you have any final thoughts to share with the rest of the audience before we wrap up, guys?
Homelessness can be solved one conversation at a time. Change hearts, change minds.
And I don't think I can find a better way to end. Can we get a massive round of applause for our